My name is Daniela. Not so long ago, I had my younger sister by the name of Chloe. I've been dreaming about this for so long because I was an only child in my family. But my joy was not long. After a while, terrible things started happening in our family, and I think my little sister was involved. Parents adopted her at an orphanage. My mother couldn't get pregnant for a long time, but when she did, the baby was born dead. The mother could not believe it, and for a long time she could not recover from such a shock, which served as a discord and a cold relationship with father. They could not have any more children. Everyone pretended that everything was normal so that it would not affect me in any way, but something in me remained, something that from time to time ached in my chest. My parents put it all down to childhood trauma, and they didn't tell me much about their life. They decided that you cannot live in the past and should not drown in grief, and a decent time has passed since this tragedy. I grew up and turned 15. My parents decided to revive their happy family. They finally had another long-awaited daughter, and I have a little sister. This was the path to harmony in the family. If someone can't have children and someone has lost their parents, then why not to help each other? To not brighten up the lives of people who have lost their most valuable things? After all, my parents took a long time to come to this. They had the strength and courage to adopt Chloe. She was 12 years old. My parents wanted a younger child, I will not hide it, but she was a gifted and capable child, which immediately attracted attention to her. Well-mannered, polite, talented, with a great interest in drawing and studying, and a good attitude to all adults and teachers of the orphanage. This set her apart from the noisy and naughty children. Her first day at school was very difficult for her. I supported her in every possible way and accompanied her to school lunch and recess. School children poked at her and called her a foundling. The latter made Chloe lose her temper, and she pushed one of the boys and ran out of the school crying. Months passed, and this boy had a fracture. He was riding at a considerable speed on his bike because he was afraid to get wet on the road because of the rain, and his joy was unlimited because this bike was stolen from him, and he found it a couple of days later in the back of the house. Maybe one of the boys joked, he thought. I thought so too, until I found out that the bike was faulty. His father said something about pedals, bearings, threads. I don't know the details. But I definitely suspect who is involved in this and who went to such a cruel act. It is not to pour a bottle of water on the offender and not to stain the chair with chalk. It was a deliberate intent to harm and take revenge on the person. But who would believe it? And I chose to remain silent, sometimes even doubting my perception. Until the chain of coincidences and accidents began, when children were fighting or getting into trouble, they were seriously injured and severely damaged. Chloe was always there and surprisingly not at all involved. This was a huge noise for our school because it was famous for its reputation of excellent, good, and decent students. The puzzle was quickly put together when, at the insistence of her mother, Chloe was told to stay away from such incidents and pay more attention to her studies, setting me as an example. It all quickly turned into a wild scandal. Mother first questions Chloe's poise, but father, who came home late from work, did not believe his wife and said that this was just a teenage rebellion and she overestimated the importance to it. In the morning, my mother found my dead kitty in her bed, which was clearly smashed with a rock. Immediately, my mother rushed into our room and pulled Chloe out of her bed, and she got up and smiled ominously, as if nothing had happened. Began to comb her hair in front of the mirror and asked what they could do to her. Beat her? Give her back? Daddy won't let me do that. He loves me. At worst, I'll accuse you of periodically beating me up. I hope we understand each other. After this conversation, my mother and I buried the animal. The parents' relationship began to deteriorate because he didn't like his wife's behavior toward Chloe. He wasn't there. He didn't know the whole truth. The final push to discord was the mother's argument that the shelter has no information about the origin of this sinister Chloe. It turned out that she was transferred from another orphanage that burned down in the fire. She was silent for a long time and did not answer questions. Nothing was preserved, and the decision was made to leave her, not to throw her out on the street. I haven't lived with my father since. They moved in with my grandmother. We see each other occasionally, but I don't know what's going on in Chloe's life. And today, I found out that my grandmother died from a gas leak. She did not like Chloe, considered her a stranger and negligent. They blamed it all on my unfortunate father, who long ago got drunk after the divorce and stopped caring for his daughter and participating in her life. It looked like an obvious murder, the motive being the house. Yes, and Chloe confirmed conflicts between her father and grandmother on the grounds of property. I didn't believe it because they had a great relationship. And why would he do that if the house was registered to him and she was helping him live? Just live. Everything was already on her slender shoulders. They decided to send Chloe to our house until she came of age. I wondered why all this was happening. Why is she coming back? No, I understand why. But what can we expect? Revenge? Reprisal? Retribution? What other surprises will present us with the fate of Chloe? Who is she and what is her purpose? I reread and saw a lot of stories about mental illness and abnormalities, movies about children from orphanages, but it all looks like fiction and fiction. No one believes them, and I understand them. I write this with fear and with tears in my eyes. I'm afraid for myself and my mother, and I'm afraid to even imagine the consequences. I'll have to live with her for 3 more years, 3 whole years, if I live to see this day.
Hi, my name is Den. I don't want to sound unassuming, but if you haven't met any guys who don't have a lot of nobility or something, well, I'm one of them. I'm joking, and I'm not joking. In short, listen to my story. I guarantee you will be intrigued. And yes, I will be happy if you write your opinion in the comments, as well as like my story. Anyway, at first we lived as a small family. Dad, Mom, Sister Abby, and me. We lived like everyone else. Abby and I went to school, and my parents worked. We did not often relax with the family. Recently, we used to like to skate, and go to the movies together, or just sit at home and watch something, discuss, play Monopoly, and then entertainment became less and less. Abby and I have already asked our parents to sit with us, but each time we heard some excuses, especially from my mother, and then it turned out that she wanted to leave us. Yes, it was a nightmare. We didn't even believe it at first, but when my mother packed her bags and said that she had another one, it was a huge blow for our father. I was even afraid that he would never come to his senses, but little by little, we began to cope. Several years have passed since that moment, and I still remember how my mother ran out of the house to the taxi that arrived and did not even turn around. Of course, I was so angry. Abby was more upset, and Dad was in shock. And so, as soon as we all came to our senses, Dad gave us a gift. Guess what? I already had a bad feeling that day. I knew something bad was going to happen. I'd missed the first class, which was an important test. The teacher was mad at me, sent me to retake, and Abby had fallen off her bike that day and hurt her leg. I rushed to the medicine cabinet, but there wasn't even a green card. My mood was already spoiled. In the evening, we were waiting for my father. He promised to bring us delicious food and a restaurant. In the end, we set the table and were already hungry and waiting for my father, when suddenly the door opened and a woman came in instead of my father. Dad followed her in with a bunch of bags in his hands, and there was food. We got up and said hello like well-behaved children, took the package, and started unloading them. The lady said we were really cute and ran to wash our hands and then started helping us. We looked at her questioningly, but it wasn't proper to ask her out loud in front of a guest, so we just didn't say anything. It was just before dinner started that the father said the woman's name was Miss Tiara, but she interrupted him and told us to just call her Tiara. We also introduced ourselves and started eating. Judging by the dinner, and the way father carefully tended to her, it was obvious that they were dating, and not so long ago. When dinner was over, Abby and I went to our rooms. Before going to bed, Abby said she didn't like Miss Tiara, but I asked her to wait for her conclusions. After all, our dad is lonely and it's normal for him to start a relationship all these years later. Our mother probably has her own family for a long time. Abby lowered her head and lay down on the bed. I made her promise not to tell my dad her opinion yet, at least until he officially made a statement. She agreed. Tiara had come to our house several times in the past week, and Abby still hadn't kept her promise. "Tiara," she said to her as Miss picked up a glass of juice and sipped it slowly, "are you sleeping with my father?" At that moment, Miss's nose was full of juice. My father was choking on the meat, and I was all smiles. Father scolded her for asking such a direct question, but Tiara stopped him. She told Abby that she and Dad are dating and she really hopes to be friends with us. My sister said that our family doesn't need such friends. "We're fine without you," she said. Dad scolded her again, and I excused myself, took her hand, and led her into the room. I talked to her, asked her not to do it again, and asked her to give my father a chance. After dinner, of course, we both had a lecture from my father. I asked him if he intended to marry her, to which my father did not answer clearly. Abby said she didn't like the tiara, but Dad asked her not to be jealous and to give her time to prove herself. Then he went to his room. At night of the same day, my father received a call from work and was told to go on a business trip urgently. This didn't happen before, so we were very confused. I didn't know what to do with Abby, even though she was already going to school, but she still seemed like a child to me. Dad immediately called Tiara and asked her to come. Yes, she agreed to look after us for a couple of days in his absence. It was polite of her, but Abby was hysterical. We quickly saw my father off and went to bed. Abby came to my room to talk. She said she didn't trust the woman, and I explained that she was just jealous of father, but that sooner or later he would get married. At that time, we had no idea what was waiting for us. Abby and I stayed up late that night. I passed out, and my sister couldn't sleep, so she went out for a drink of water. She woke me up in the middle of the night, and I didn't even know what was going on. Abby was frantic about Tiara going through Dad's things, but I didn't think it was strange. Let her dig. In the morning, we woke up to the gorgeous smell of pancakes. It turned out that Tiara made us breakfast, which was nice, and I thanked her for it, but Abby didn't even touch it. Then Tiara said that she wanted to make friends with us, so she came up with some games for us and walks in the park. I thought it was a good idea, and Abby didn't say anything, but I dressed her and we went to the park. After walking for a couple of hours, we got hungry and returned home. While I was changing, Abby noticed something strange in the house, and she said that Tiara had found Dad's vault and was trying to break into it. And I didn't like it anymore. I went into my father's room, and Tiara quickly jumped out of there. "Oh, I thought you were asleep. Don't you sleep during the day?" She laughed nervously. Abby called her a thief and chased her out of the house. I asked her to leave politely and watched her go with a very unkind look. We called my father and asked him to come. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Wow, is Dad that fast? I opened the door, and there were police officers and a tear-stained Tiara. The uniformed man said they needed to talk to their father, but when they found out he wasn't there, he wanted to take Abby to the station. To my questions, he said that she was suspected of stealing someone else's ring. "Her," the policeman said, pointed at the tiara. "What?" I asked. "Yes, this is a mistake. It can't be. We see it for the first time in our lives," I shouted, but everything turned out to be useless. Tiara ran into our house and started turning everything over, and then opened the safe and pulled out her ring. Can you imagine my face? Abby started crying. I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. And then he said I did it. I took all the blame. They took me to the station, and I told Abby to wait for father. After a few hours of waiting, my father arrived. He didn't know how to react, and the tearful Tiara rushed to his shoulder to cry. I didn't say anything. I knew he wouldn't believe me. He didn't take anything Abby said, because we're the only ones who know the code to the safe. And just when I thought I was really going to jail, Abby suddenly dragged my father home. She asked him to trust her, but I didn't know what she was up to. It turns out that our little smart girl remembered about the video cameras in our house. Dad looked at the records and saw everything for himself, then saved them and gave them to the police. I was released, and Tiara was put in my place. It turned out that she wanted to get rid of us, his children, so that we wouldn't get in her way. She only wanted to arrange their personal life, but we were superfluous there. It's a good thing we installed cameras a long time ago. My father was in shock, and for a long time asked us for forgiveness. Did you like our story? Then put likes, comment, and be sure to subscribe to the channel, friends.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bridget. I have 2 older sisters in my family, and they just hate me. And all because my parents pay more attention to me than to them. Tell me, have you ever been in the same situation? It is very difficult to live in a house where, on the one hand, there is the love of parents, and on the other, the hatred of sisters. This is not how I imagined my relationship with them to be. They hurt me a lot all my childhood, but then everything changed. Now I will tell you why and how it happened. And do not forget to put likes, subscribe to the channel, and write your opinion in the comments. From the beginning, as far as I can remember, my sisters Monica and Erica got along much better than they did with me. They had common interests, toys, they often arranged evenings together watching cartoons, and it usually went like this. My mother cut a whole plate of fruit, put it on the table next to the sofa, turned on the cartoon, and they went to the kitchen to talk. I loved watching TV like that too, but Monica and Erica would lie down on the couch so I wouldn't have any room. As soon as I asked to lie down or at least sit down, they immediately began to resent. Move away! Don't you see that there is not enough space? I was terribly offended. Then I would take a pillow and sit on the floor next to the sofa. As soon as I reached for the fruit, I was beaten on the hand. They said that they had only a little bit left. Then I would start crying with resentment. My mother would come, the girls would get up abruptly, make excuses, like they don't know why I'm on the floor and why I'm crying. My mother always said they were older, so they had to take care of me, and then she talked to me so that I wouldn't be offended by them. Strange, I was offended, but not for long. By nature, I always grew up a kind person. I wanted to be friends with them, but they did not let me in, and so it continued for many years. Since we attended the same school, many children were surprised when they found out that we were from the same family, because they had never seen a colder relationship. I didn't know how to fix it, but I believed that someday my sisters would change their attitude. But then it only got worse. When I started going to middle school, Monica and Erica looked with envy at my progress in school. I often got good grades, awards for participating in competitions, I studied easily, and my parents were proud of me. Monica and Erica were also talented. They sang and danced well. Mom and Dad constantly went to them for performances in clubs, but they thought that this was not enough. They didn't get enough attention. And once, Monica lost in a vocal competition. She cried bitterly, although she got second place. I tried to comfort her. I used my last pocket money to buy her favorite cake, but she threw it away, said it was all because of me, because if I hadn't gone to bed so early, she would have had more time to practice properly. But what should I do if I didn't get enough sleep, especially since my school program was loaded and I was very tired? In the end, she blamed me for everything, and then said that it would be better if I was not in the family. These words hit me hard. No one heard them except Erica. My second sister just shook her head. What are you even doing here? We lived normally without you, then you appeared, she said. I was very upset, said I wouldn't bother them again, and went into my room. There is no feeling more offensive than the feeling of being unnecessary to your own sisters. I wanted so much to be closer to them, but they wouldn't let me near them. And then something happened. It was winter. Mom told us to go and see our grandmother, who lived not far from our home. Monica and Erica said that they would go without us, but my mother insisted, saying that my grandmother missed the 3 of us, and she stayed at home to cook dinner. My mother wrapped a pie for us, and I carried it. My sisters, as always, walked ahead of me and didn't even wait for me. We were almost there when I heard Erica scream. In front of her was a dog. It was huge and black. It looked at her as if she were prey, growled, and prepared to attack. Monica quickly hid behind a tree, and Erica was left standing there alone. I approached very slowly, calling softly to Erica, but she froze in horror. I told her not to run, just to stay where she was. I moved a little closer and Erica turned back. She saw me and started crying and said, "Help me." At that moment, the dog lunged at her at breakneck speed, and I grabbed Erica's arm and pulled her towards me. She hid behind me and then ran towards Monica. The dog wanted to run after her, but I threw a pie at it and hit it right in the face. This only made it more angry, and it stopped, but still ran towards Erica. I shouted for her to climb the tree, and while Erica was climbing, the dog was already very close. The dog managed to grab her by the pants. It pulled her down, Erica screamed, then I found a big rock and ran at the dog. I slapped it on the back, and the dog lunged at me. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my arm, and it bit into me. I screamed, covered myself with my other hand, and the dog did not loosen his grip. He had terrible eyes. I thought that now he would bite my neck. At this moment, someone ran out of a house, called the dog by name, and then ran up to us and began to beat him. At the sight of the man, the dog flattened its tail and began to whine. The man put a muzzle on him and immediately gave him an injection. He helped me up and began to examine me. It was a good thing I had a thick jacket. The bite wasn't as bad as it could have been. The man saw the blood and called an ambulance. The girls ran up to me, still crying. They started looking at my bloody hand. Erica and Monica called my mom, and I was taken to the hospital. In general, nothing terrible happened to me. I was lucky that the dog is not rabid. I was given 2 stitches and I lay down to rest. It was more of a fright than a wound. After 10 minutes, my mother and sisters came running. My mother immediately examined me, asked how I felt, and then ran to talk to the doctor. The owner of the dog also came to the hospital. He said he was very sorry, and this had not happened before. He promised to pay compensation, pay for treatment, and put the dog to sleep. I felt sorry for his pet, but what if he bites someone else, and maybe to death? I was very sleepy, but Monica and Erica came into the room. They looked guilty. "Why did you risk yourself for us? You could have died," they asked. I said I didn't want any of them to get hurt, so I rushed over to help. "Anyone could have been in your place," I said to my sister, but she replied, "But not everyone would have dared to be in your place." I yawned, said I wanted to rest, and the girls went out. I was discharged the next day. When I got home, a lot of goodies awaited me. My sisters cleaned the house and even pasted a poster with the inscription, "Our Hero," in my room. I was pleased. We had dinner, and then my mom suggested we watch a cartoon or a movie again, only this time, Monica and Erica made room for me in the middle. I sat down on the floor out of habit, but they picked me up, told me that my place was there with them on the couch, and pushed the plate of fruit over. I accepted, and we watched a movie. It was a good evening. After watching the movie, I was about to go to bed, but Erica stopped me. She hesitated for a long time, and then said, "Thank you. We used to treat you so badly, and yet you risked yourself for us. Forgive us," she said, and began to cry. I hugged her and told her that everything was fine, that I wasn't angry or offended because everyone makes mistakes. "We were jealous of you. You succeed in everything. You study well, you are talented, you always help Mother around the house. Our parents love you more than they love us," Monica said, but I replied that this is not the case. Our parents love everyone equally. It's just that everyone saw what they wanted to see, but it's not too late to change. "You are my sisters, and therefore my family, which I will always protect at all costs," I said. Monica hugged me from behind, and we sat there for a few minutes. It was the first time she'd ever hugged me. My mother always taught me that no matter how many people there are in a family, love is big, so there's enough for everyone. Personally, I agree with this too. Since then, my sisters and I have been inseparable. Now they always consider me, pamper me, play and watch movies with me. It became our little tradition. Do you have any traditions in your family?